Okay, so this next topic is podcasting's importance in news. We have a straw poll about it right now. I'm going to send the link again. So for background, there was this true crime podcast that happened in Australia starting in September. It ended recently. It was held by an investigative journalist. It went like 16 episodes or something about a case from the 70s that had gone unsolved about the disappearance of this woman. I don't fucking remember her name. I think is it Lynn Dawson?
Yeah.
Lynn Dawson. So just recently, I think like 2 days ago or something, because of that podcast, not only was the case reopened in Australia, it led to an arrest. It led to the arrest of her husband. I forgot his name. Something Dawson, who was an ex-rugby player.
It's like
He's
John
pretty,
Dawson or something like that. He's
something
like
like
70
that, yeah.
now.
He was a pretty popular rugby player in Australia. It led to his arrest. The details of it are kind of crazy too, from what I remember. But so yeah, it's very interesting. I've read a couple of the reports, and all of the major news networks reporting on it just kind of refer to the podcast as like the beacon that led to this thing.
Yeah.
It's like giving the podcast the full respect of legitimate news source, which is something I think we were heading towards. But like to see it finally said by other legitimate news sources, especially as a journalism major, having been a journalism major, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's also NPR too. Like, I feel
true.
like that, like the for context, right? This is like the NPR's podcast, like the Teacher's Pet or whatever. So it's like it makes sense. I mean, NPR has kind of been like that anyway in regards to just like true crime, like when it comes to true crime stuff like that. But yeah, like I think I wonder if that has to do with the fact that it's an NPR podcast or more so that it's a podcast.
That's true.
I'll say that I'm a little biased in regards to what I think the importance of podcasts are in relation to reporting and how it's evolved over time with new technology, because I can't disclose what, but I am helping out with a podcast involving crime and stuff.
That's cool.
And so I'm coming from a perspective, production wise, just thinking, this is something we need more of.
That's fair.
I mean, just short, very concise thoughts on that, so I don't give details. But
no, it's understandable.
It's very interesting to me.
Well, I mean, like, it makes sense though. Like, podcasts is really kind of like the offshoot of like radio.
That's true. Thinking about that now, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I guess like the question I'm posing, I mean, the question as it's written here is podcasting going to, did I say replace news? I didn't really mean replace news, but like, can podcasts be a viable substitute
For news?
Yeah, if like you decide you don't want to fucking watch the news or read the news, you listen to a podcast, is it a good enough substitute? Would it have enough substance?
Yeah.
Or would it, yeah.
I mean, like, I think so, just due to this fact that it's like there's already shit that like replaces news already. Like, people, I feel like the question that we're having about podcasting in the news is probably like what people have been what people might have been predicting about like social media in the news, and so kind of like podcasting is kind of just become like almost like because it's so easy to consume, and like instead of like watching TV, like it's like, you know, you can like listen to a podcast while you do your laundry or like while you're like on the bus. You can't always like watch TV, and stuff. So like it wouldn't surprise you if people get their news from podcasts. Because I know, like, for me, like when I'm like when I got hip to podcasts, I would, and so even to an extent now, like some podcasts I listen to more podcasts than I do for like music or something like that. Like it can be episodic, almost as if like you're watching TV.
That's fair.
Yeah. There's also a conversational element to some podcasts. Like you may have heard of the Super Best Friends Let's Play podcast. They operate in Canada and they're fucking awesome. But basically, their podcasts, unlike others, like I think Radiolab, when I think of news or current events or other topical issues, those feel less like, hey, here's the news, and more, hey, you're chatting with friends, kind of, who are telling you about the news. And usually those more conversational formatted podcasts are more about community than it is about actually telling you something new. But that also fills a role that traditional media would. It's
Right.
interesting to me that I don't think that podcasting, you were saying that it replaces news in a way. I think it's just a different format. Like traditional reporting has a place. But if I'm in the car driving upstate for Christmas in like a couple weeks, I don't want to sit around and listen to radio where the story changes every 5 minutes and I don't get enough detail to really care about what's happening. I instead want to hear like, okay, let's listen to some Radio Lab and listen for an hour about like, uh, I don't know. I'm thinking, what was it? They've had a few recent podcasts where I've just listened through the entire set and then gone, oh shit, that's the end of that one. Oh no! And then I hear at the end, oh, and wait for part two. We're going to be releasing that next week. And I check my phone and oh shit, this was from a couple months ago, so
Right.
part two's already out.
It's the best.
Great. It feels like it's the best combination of on-demand and scheduled media that I can imagine.
Right. And yeah. No, what were you gonna say?
No, I was saying that's just what I need, basically, with the way that my life and work goes. I need to be able to start and stop on demand, but I also like having a more structured format to listen to rather than like YouTube videos where I have to be watching it in order to get the full effect.
Yeah, definitely. I feel you. Especially just like when I was like when we were in college or whatever. Like I definitely like listen to podcasts. Or even just like when when I was at work. Like it's a nice substitute just because it's like I can't always play music, but podcasts there's a little bit more leeway. It's like a talk radio type of thing. And
That's
too much
true.
to Noah's point about like there's always going to be a need for like live reporting and stuff like that. I think the best type of news is kind of like new because of the way that podcasts are kind of like news topics that like cover like a type of like a subject of what's going on, or kind of like, or maybe that's like more of like a this weekend type of news. Like I feel like for radio, like that's because it's just so live and in person. Like I feel like I wouldn't mind like checking it out for like breaking news or whatever, but just because that's just the way nature of how like it is. But I feel like for like you know like true crime, or kind of like going going over the history of something, you know, there's a lot more room for it to be like much more informational. And that's kind of why the podcasting information was so successful. Like I feel like if there'd be no way that you could do The Teacher's Pet as a radio show.
That's true.
Yeah.
I have a weird question that has nothing to do with our topic, but relates to podcasts, I guess.
Yeah.
If podcasts were to go more radio in some respects, like what would your feelings be? In what ways do you think it could work? In what ways do you think it would fault, etc.?
More radio as in the live portion of it, or
I feel like definitely like more in the live, but also more in like, I mean, podcasts have commercials and stuff, but maybe the format changing a little bit and getting just a little bit more sporadic sometimes. Just like it becoming more radio in a lot of aspects.
I feel like
At what point does it become radio?
I feel like you can make the case that podcasting has in the regard. Like I feel like it has and it hasn't, just due to the fact that like radio is a lot of what radio is about like real estate, but like real estate in regards to like stations and stuff like that. Podcasting is a bit different, where like because it's like through the internet and stuff like that. Like a lot of like why 97.1 isn't because they like the numbers, because of like the frequency or whatever. And now we all just share a frequency. And so like you can make the case that it kind of already has, in regard to just like the way businesses have kind of like capitalized and bought some podcasts, and like some are trying to like, you know, make like networks and stuff. Like I know like CBS has their kind of subset. I know like the Loudspeakers Network, which is like through like kind of one of the more like on the music end. He's like probably like Combat Jack, rest in peace. He kind of had like a network of like a lot of like podcasts. So like in that way of like commercialization, I feel like podcasting is already kind of like in that format.
It's fair.
I think that I would listen to podcasts less if they became radio. again, I usually listen to podcasts when I'm either working, in which case I have a consistent network connection and it would make a difference, or if I'm driving. And at that point, I try to be mindful of the data that I'm using on my phone. I try to make sure that I have a consistent connection in case I have to get a message or need to update directions or whatever. But if I drive through the Poconos or something and I'm on my way upstate, there is no way that I can rely on having a consistent connection to listen to a podcast that's live. Like that's not going to work.
Right.
And I think that's a huge limitation. I don't, aside from the format itself, I think that the considerations need to be made for the fact that the United States does not have very good internet service compared to a lot of the world. It's not as consistent as it should be.
Yeah.
And so when I'm listening to something on radio, like very infrequently I'll listen to something that's just happens to be on radio while I'm driving, and then I drive just far away enough from the station that I lose signal. I go, well,
Right.
shit, I guess what I was listening to is never going to come back.
Yeah.
The same thing could potentially happen for a podcast. If at that point it's not even a podcast, it is a radio show.
Right.
If I can't access it again because, well, shit, my internet's out for the next 20 minutes while I'm driving, I might as well switch to something else.
Yeah. Or more so that's like kind of like I guess like satellite radio or not satellite but like the tower radio, because I mean technically what we're doing now is radio like, and that like, you know, like it's over the air and like and happening in real time.
That's true.
Yeah. But this is also being recorded, and presumably somebody can listen to it later. That's the big draw for me.
Right.
That's also true.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of like radio shows also have hit that point as well,
Yeah.
where they get pre-recorded
And put up
and
on
like YouTube mostly. Like if there's a radio interview for like an artist I like, I'm gonna watch it on YouTube a week later.
yeah.
It'll be up.
Yeah.
So it's starting to blur the lines a little bit in terms of like the differences. I mean, I think the format and the way you receive it is the biggest difference.
yeah.
But even then, some of that is starting to blur because, like, if we did a talk show, for instance,
Right.
interview style talk show, at what point is that still a podcast versus more radio like?
Right. Actually, that's like what a lot of radio. That's It's actually funny that you mentioned that, especially because like I remember, back when I was like really big into Charlemagne, like I would listen to the Breakfast Clubs, like years ago they would have like their interviews on the website, and so like it was kind of just, it was very podcast like, and so like what a lot of some shows are doing now, because they have like the iHeart like podcast media awards or whatever, and you could see that like in some of the categories it would be some of the radio shows that are in those categories despite them being radio shows, because they would just like take the interviews and stuff like that and just re-upload them as podcasts.
Yeah.
So like it's very interesting in that way, because it's some people might say it's like it's kind of like a cheat or something like that.
I think it's hard. It's hard not to. That's the thing.
Right.
Like, I think the term we're looking for altogether here is liminality, or being liminal. In other words, having a very specific stretch of time in which something exists. For radio, everything is entirely real time, unless it's recorded for future use, or unless it's designed to be recorded and then played back later as a podcast. It will never exist again. No one in public will be able to just download the podcast, or I keep saying it. They won't be able to download the radio show afterwards unless it's deliberately been set up like that, or if they had the foresight to record it.
Right. So I guess it really boils down to like accessibility.
I guess accessibility, time-locked content has been weird for me, because I've mentioned before that I've worked on a couple of ARGs and other things where it's impossible to get the full experience after it's happened. You cannot go back and see half the websites I've worked on for clients and for friends where we've done cool stories and stuff, because the story unfolded through those websites, people saw it, people put together puzzles and whatnot, and then right at the end, everything got nuked because that was a story-related thing. Or the site is damaged and you can't see the rest of it anymore. Like, at least in that sense, I appreciate content that is not designed to be seen whenever, because it forces you to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, that's kind of the thing about some podcasts, though, in which, like, you know, like certain subject matter, like in regards to like, because of like the nature of this teacher's pet, podcast or whatever. It was a podcast about like a cold case. So it's kind of like, you know, there's like a lot of
Don't worry about it. Continue.
There's like a lot of like room to kind of like, okay, like to go, you can go back to it because it's not like a real time case that's happening where you kind of like have deadlines and things like that. And there are some podcasts that are like solely based on like current events, and so like listening to it might, unless you're in there for the personality, the news aspect is almost kind of like pointless.
Any final thoughts before we go to our break on this topic?
No, I think we've run the idea of time locked content into the ground right now.
Yeah.
We beat that horse.
We beat the absolute shit out of it and enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's just, you know, with new technologies come new mediums, so.
That's true.
Yep, I wonder what's going to be next.
News via memes or something.
I mean, we already have that. It's
boy.
called BuzzFeed.
Right.
BuzzFeed is a weird mix of things because there's like good BuzzFeed and there's bad BuzzFeed. Like they're, in terms of their journalistic integrity for their like articles and stuff, there's some really good ones in there. They have some good journalists. And then you get to like the content that makes the money, and then you're like, that's the trash.
Yeah.
But it makes some money.
You know, BuzzFeed News is fantastic. BuzzFeed itself is just trash. I'm surprised they make more money doing that.
I mean, like, the name kind of gives it away.
But yeah, just a little bit.